Welcome and hello, Investigator T.
Hello, everyone. How are you?
Very well. We really appreciate you taking the time to come on and have a chat. With all your expertise and experience, your professional opinion will help us followers of the Making a Murderer case get a clearer understanding on the behaviours of the perpetrators that commit these crimes. Before we just start though, I just want to thank a few supporters from behind the scenes that have helped with the documentations that I sent to you so you could study and help me put these questions together. Just quickly, they're Millbilly, T1, Big Jeff, Just a Denny, Caf, Bron, Reality Check, Kaboom, Holly C, Myed, Joras, and Kate. All right, Investigator T, are you ready?
Yeah, fire away.
All right, so obviously I sent you some documentations and I asked you to do some profiling and stuff. I based it on the Ryan side of it because at this point of time, Ryan's a significant Denny suspect, Kathleen likes to say. So, I just wanted you to get a bit of a feel of his character, his body language when you watched his videos I sent you. But the first question I've got, it's more of a generalized question. It's what are the statistics that a partner /ex /family member commits this kind of crime versus an opportunity random kill?
Anecdotally, it's quite uncommon for the suspect of a murder to be someone who wasn't known to the victim.
Mm-hmm.
I had a quick look on Google today. Around 85% of the murders that were committed this year were committed by someone who knew the victim, whether it was a spouse or a friend or gang members that know each other or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's quite rare for strangers to commit a murder, and if they do, it usually involves some sort of case of mistaken identity or a crime gone wrong, like a rape or burglary, something like that, where the killing is not the end goal. It wasn't intended in the first place.
Wow.
Except in cases like serial killers, where obviously the objective is to actually kill someone.
Yeah.
So it's actually quite rare for the perpetrator to be not known to the subject.
Yeah. Without indulging, obviously, too much into your work of like your work, because I know we have to protect like your aspects of that. If there's been cases you have seen, a lot of the crimes that you have gone to, is it usually like things you know or whatever? Again, is that fall into that category?
Yeah.
Or is always someone
I've worked on numerous homicides and serious assaults and that sort of thing, and the vast majority have been the offenders have been known to the victim.
Yeah.
It's really rare that something is just a random attack.
Yeah.
And if it is, there's a whole range of motives, like being drug affected and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other main one would be something where like a burglary has gone wrong or something like that.
Yeah.
But the overwhelming majority of offenders have known their victims.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for that one. Question number 2. What are the statistics that someone who commits a murder inserts themselves into the investigation? This one I actually like because the Ryan situation itself, you know, as a Denny suspect, he led the researchers and the civilian people when he was giving maps out, he was giving personal phone numbers. So he inserted himself a lot. He even went and moved into Teresa's house after the fact. So what are the statistics that they do that, like if someone inserts themselves?
I don't actually have any statistics to per se, but just going on what FBI profilers have done, it's not uncommon at all for people to, if they're not inserting themselves intentionally into the case, they just try to assimilate themselves in some way, like trying to be helpful, like putting themselves forward as like volunteering themselves as a suspect in the hope that it looks like they're actually trying to be trying to make it appear that they're interested or that they want to clear themselves with actually trying to help.
Yeah.
So it's not uncommon at all, especially when you read FBI profilers books about how people insert themselves, like Wayne Wallace, the guy that was killing all the black kids in the 70s. That's quite well known. He was inserting himself and helping broadcasting flyers and that sort of thing when he was actually the perpetrator. So it's pretty common.
Wow, that's funny you should say that, because Ryan was actually the one that was giving out maps and everything as well. But yeah, thanks for that. Question number 3. How likely is it that someone close to a victim could be capable of dismembering and burning a body?
Again, the homicides that I've worked on or been involved with, it's a hard one. It's quite rare.
Right.
And I think one of the main ones I was involved with was actually because the victims are known by the perpetrator.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing for them to do.
Yeah.
Unless they're actually motivated a lot to try and get rid of evidence and stuff like that. But the ones that I've worked on, it's actually quite rare, and it's definitely next level sort of thinking to dismember someone or burn someone. Most of the victims I've dealt with they've just been left in situ. They haven't been posed or anything like that. So it's hard. I'm sure it's happened before, but just from my experience, I can't really recall anyone being actually dismembered.
Yep. Wow. Thanks for that one. I always thought that, like, if you had murdered someone you loved, and especially if it was a fit of rage, to go that extra step and mutilate them would be a really hard thing. Like, that might be when the remorsefulness comes into it and all that. So, yeah, that's been a curiosity of mine. Question 4, based on the information that I provided you with Ryan in this case, could you please give us an overall profile, like the body language that you saw? That was like the interviews I sent you with him in court and the interviews he had with the media. Yeah.
It's only really brief. It's quite hard to get an accurate profile of someone just based on what you sent me. But my initial impressions were that when he was getting asked the questions, it looked like he was making stuff up on the go. He wasn't. When you answer a question, there's little visual cues, I suppose, that you can look for. Like they say that sometimes, like if you're lying, you look down and to the left and that sort of thing. But if you're not focusing on the person asking the questions, if you're just sort of staring off into the middle distance, it looks like you're thinking of the answer. And it didn't look like he was actually recounting what he was doing. He was just making it up as he was going along. It's kind of like, I suppose, being a parent, you see your kids or other people, just trying to make up stories, and you can see that it's obviously they're not really recounting what's actually happened. They're just making it up as they're going along.
Yeah.
And he seemed quite smarmy as well, and quite cocky. That's not an indication of guilt. I think it shows an attitude.
Yeah.
Like a pretty cold attitude, to be honest, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that one. A lot of us that have watched that, we're all like, he gives that smiling delight. That's when they're answering a question, they kind of got that slight smirk on their face, like they're like, I know something you don't. But it's like you said, it's not that they're guilty, it's just that they're got that cockiness about them as well. So it's interesting you said that.
Yeah, it doesn't bring his truth. He never rang to me as truthful. I don't know. There's just something in his tone or something like that just didn't sit right.
Yeah. Next question. How likely is it that the killer would plant evidence, for example, in this case, bones, close to someone else, trying to frame them?
Again, I've dealt with a few homicides and been involved in them, and there have been a number of occasions where they've tried to throw investigators off their tracks by wearing disguises or setting up circumstances so that they may appear to be somewhere else as opposed to where they're actually saying they are.
Mm-hmm.
Things like mobile phone towers, where they might say that they were there at a certain location, and the mobile tower might, off their mobile phone, might ping that location, but they might be on the extreme edge of that tower range and not actually be where they said they were. Yeah, and as for planting evidence, I mean, it's just human nature to try and avoid prosecution or getting found out, especially for a murder. So it boils down to simple things like children, eating a bunch of lollies and then stashing the lolly wrappers under their brother's pillow or something, so they don't get found out and blame goes on someone else.
Absolutely.
So it's as old as time. I mean, I'm sure there's biblical stories about that sort of thing.
Oh, absolutely. It's funny you should mention the towers, and because that's such a significant part of this case. With the last ping that we have of Teresa, her phone went to a voice message, and that was it. She wiped off the face of the earth. So it's funny you should mention that, which in a few of our podcasters with Big Jeff in Foul Play and Millbilly and other people and the researchers have actually delved into these kind of questions. So it's really interesting that you mentioned that. So that's awesome. Yeah, wow. Question number 6. This one's a bit different. How likely is it that the killer would have some kind of connection to the place he dumps remains?
Anecdotally speaking, again, I didn't do any real research on it, but just with the cases and investigations I've been involved in, the vast majority operate where they're comfortable. They know the area, they know the routes, they know where they can leave stuff, they know how to get away. So it's a criminal indicator, or it's an indicator of criminal activity just by being comfortable in the environment that they're in. So we get cross-border offences quite often, but say, for example, offenders might cross a border from a different district into our district and steal a car or do a crime. They will go back and dump the car back where they live or not far from where they live, and they'll have a dropped car somewhere. So it's very common for people or criminals to operate in the environments that they're comfortable in, because obviously they have to have a degree of security.
Yeah.
Most criminals don't want to get caught, so it just gives them a feeling of comfort, I suppose, in working in their comfort zones, and they don't generally go out of their way to operate in environments that they're not familiar with. So, in the case of of dumping remains, it would have to be somewhere where they are familiar with, where they know they're not going to get found. They know that the local traffic might be really slow or non-existent. Little backtracks and that sort of thing where they know people don't go. So you have to have some sort of local knowledge if you're actually trying to ditch something, because if you don't and you're not aware of your local environment, for all you know, you could be dumping your body remains on the side of a frequently used freeway. You have no idea. But for the most part, they just hang around spots where they know and where they're comfortable.
Yeah. Well, that's really good. Question, next one. This one's actually really, really interesting, because a lot of us researchers have noticed something that doesn't seem right in this part. In your experience, when someone is missing, how often do the police go to the premises of the victim? Is it normal to have a total of 136 visits in 12 days?
No, not in my experience. No, not at all. It just depends on the circumstances. If someone's reported missing at the initial stages, uniform officers will go to the house, obviously, because that's the first place they'll go looking for someone. If there's no obvious signs of foul play, or there's nothing to indicate that there's anything that's gone wrong, they'll leave the house either secure or in the hands of someone who, like a family member.
Mm-hmm.
and then they might canvass the neighbourhood and find out if anyone's got camera footage or anyone has seen anything. But once they've established that there's no real reason to secure the house at all, then generally it's just it's on the books, but it's not a focus for the investigation. If they find anything, obviously, like if they find a blood trail or they find signs of forced entry or something like that, then obviously the house gets locked down and gone over with a fine-tooth comb, because that's most likely a scene, one if not many. But to visit a house 130 odd times in 12 days is bizarre. I don't really see why that would happen unless they were going back to collect evidence over and over and over again, in which case I don't understand that either, because if that was the case, then the house would have been locked down, the forensic area would have been set up around it so that no one could go in or out, and that forensic evidence would be preserved. But yeah, it didn't make sense at all. I couldn't really understand why that would happen.
Yeah. What if I told you that Ryan actually went in and inserted himself into that house after her being missing and started staying there?
And of its own, it's not indicative of any guilt, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take a certain standpoint in the fact that he may be involved in it, it would be a clever move on his part, because any evidence obviously in the house that may link him to any kind of ill act will be tampered with, and it becomes inadmissible.
Yeah.
Especially if it's post the act, because you can't prove what went on before he went in there, and afterwards it's just any kind of evidence that you're going to bring out of the house is being tainted. So it's of no benefit at all. Once he's in the house, then you might as well write that whole house off as a crime scene, because it can be explained away quite easily.
Yep. This one's definitely a Ryan one, this question. In all the documentations that I sent you and the videos you saw about Ryan, is there anything that causes concern or stands out for him in particular that you saw?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main one that you pointed out to me was the planner.
Yes, the planner, yes.
Because if that was known to the investigators who are doing the investigation, it would have to be, again, it's not an indication of guilt, but it ties them to the victim.
Mm-hmm.
And if she had that after the last time he said he saw her, then the question begs to be asked, how did he get it?
Yeah.
And then the whole thing is just odd. He's had so much access and time and opportunity to be able to tamper with evidence, to tamper with scenes, to plant evidence and that sort of thing. It's just, I don't know, he's given far too much leeway to be able to manipulate the clues and stuff that the coppers will be finding to point in certain directions.
Absolutely, and that's what I mean. It takes you back to the fact that he was leading the search parties. He was taking all the phone calls for the family on behalf of the police force. He was doing all the step-ins, so he was taking control of everything. So again, if he had any kind of part in this crime, he was inserting himself in all the areas. Like you said, he's now able to clean up after himself and put his DNA in the places that, you know, they would have found, which is now tainted. So, yeah, I agree. And with that day planner, it's part of KZ's, you know, in her brief in the motion that it's a concern. Like, how is it that this guy has this day planner? It has written stuff on it which shouldn't have been there. There's times and phone calls that link up that says that she had that in her car the day she went missing. So if she never made it home, how did he get it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know how he's able to explain that one away. I haven't seen the interview notes, so it'll be interesting to see the full interview.
Yep.
I don't know how to explain that one away.
Just another question, just to kind of start to wrap this up, because I don't want to keep you too long, and this has been great. But can you just walk us through like the basic steps you take to eliminate as a suspect? So if you were going to eliminate him as a suspect, what steps would your task take to start narrowing him down to either eliminate him or go, shit, we've got a problem here?
Yeah, it depends on the crime scene. The crime scene examinations.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, anything that you pull from a crime scene that links someone to it will determine how much of a suspect that person is. If they examine the crime scene and didn't find any of his DNA anywhere or any kind of link for him to have been involved in the offence, then obviously he would be written off as a suspect. He'd still be on the books as a suspect, but he wouldn't be the prime suspect, I suppose, because there's nothing to link him to the offence.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the crime scene investigation, the examination has to be thorough. That's why it's really important to lock the scenes down straight away so that nothing's disturbed. And I don't think that happened in this case because he was able to get to the car. He knew where the car was, so he can put his DNA in there. It's really easy for him to write himself out of being a suspect just by the fact that his DNA and his forensic fingerprint can be easily explained at the scene in the car, because it's like,
He knew her.
Was, so,
he knew her, so he could say, I used to drive in her car all the time and stuff. Would you be shocked if I told you that they never, ever, ever took any kind of DNA or anything from him? They never got his profile, not even once. There was a lot of people actually that could have been classed as Denny suspects if they had done a thorough investigation, that they didn't even start investigating at all. In fact, they were so tunnel visioned on Stephen that there was no other investigation on pretty much anyone else.
That's I don't know. I won't cast aspersions on my fellow law enforcement officers, but that's not something that I would personally do. I think anyone who was even remotely connected to the... Can you still hear me?
Yes.
No, anyone who's even remotely connected to the... to her, mm-hmm. I think I'd be getting DNA profiles, even just to take them as, because say, for example, they went through the car and they found DNA profiles of an unsub, they would take Elimination DNA or fingerprints from those people so that they can eliminate them. Because if they found a DNA profile, say, of a person they didn't know, and then they took DNA samples from every person that was involved with her, and that didn't match to any of those people, then obviously it's none of the people they took DNA from, so they need to go looking somewhere else.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah, it staggers me that they didn't get any DNA profiles from anyone else but the people they put away.
Yeah, that's pretty much what they did. They just focused on the Avery family, and no one else was part of the investigation. They didn't even ask Ryan for an alibi. He wasn't even asked what he did the night she went missing at all. There was no proof what he was doing. And some researchers over the time that I've read from Reddit and other researchers have come up with, they used to speak of the whole of October every Monday night. And funny enough, the first one Monday night they never spoke was the night she went missing, which is, again, doesn't make him guilty. It just raises some eyebrows. You know what I mean? Like, come on. Every Monday night.
There's a lot of anomalies in this case. I just can't understand why the investigators didn't really flesh those other leads out. It appears, I mean, I've only had a quick glance at it, but it just looks like it was quite a narrow focus.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing stopping them from casting their net very wide at the start, like locking down a whole bunch of houses, scenes, getting people in, taking DNA, canvassing neighbourhoods and that sort of thing. There's nothing stopping them from doing that at all at the very start. And then they narrow it from there, because you always start big and then work your way to a point, rather than come in with a preconceived idea of who they may be looking at, and just try and get everything to fit that person. You know, I don't know. It seems to be quite a narrow focus. But
absolutely.
I don't know the full facts of it, so I'm just
that's great. Okay, so I'm going to throw in one little bonus question in there before I get to the final. And this is one that I did bring up to you today before we actually had this phone call, because I didn't think of it at the time, but it's such a significant question that I think I just have to. The question is it rare that she got shot in the head twice? To me, it seems like an overkill. Reminds me of like a hitman kill or like a drug deal. It's like a ghetto gangstery. I know that sounds silly, but it just seems really overkill. It's weird. Like 2 shots to the head.
No, it's not unusual. I mean, but I think if it was one shot, I would be almost certain that it was a stranger.
Right.
But 2 or more, I think it was definitely someone that she knew, because it was
personal.
Yeah, and if it was just a random thing, it's just like a bang and then they run off, or you know, that sort of scenario.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the homicides that I've been involved with, the damage has been quite significant. Like people getting chopped up with axes and stabbed and all sorts of stuff, you know. So it's not uncommon at all for, if the victim is known to the offender, that the offender just unleashes on that person rather than just be quite a random spur-of-the-moment act which might only involve one shot. If it's 2 or more, I'm pretty sure that it would be someone that wasn't a stranger to her.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you. Okay, so my final question, I'm going to split it into 2 parts. First part, after reviewing all this, in your professional opinion, does Ryan make a good Denny suspect?
Yes, absolutely, because just based on the circumstances that you've shown me today, he had access to the victim, he had access to the scenes, he inserted himself. His characteristics seem suspicious to me as well.
Yep.
The only real thing I couldn't figure out was why, a motive. But you said to me that they were actually intimate, so...
Yeah, so they dated for 5 years in college, and then she and her roommate Scott, which was Ryan's best friend, all still kind of had that association. They still hung in small groups and stuff, so there was still always a connection there. It was alleged that there was some kind of violence, but it hasn't ever been proven. That's why I said the word alleged. So you've got that kind of backstory, and there was an email that she sent, and she said, you know, to one of her friends, I know Ryan still likes me. I can see by the way he looks at me. And so there was definitely something there. Now, in just a quick backlog of that, when he first initially told the cops who he was, he only referred himself as a friend. It wasn't until later someone said, oh, you know, that's her ex-boyfriend. So he didn't even disclose of who. He tried to keep that quiet. And I just always think to myself, is that because for these reasons that usually the ex-partners and all that do usually get looked at first because of that connection?
I think so. I think that was the case. I mean, it's hard to say, but it would make sense to me to try and minimise your involvement in it, and then throw the deflect attention off you by being helpful.
Yes.
And having access and being able to manipulate the crime scenes is just huge.
Yeah.
Just the fact that they were intimate, I think, and there was 2 gunshots to the head. It didn't look like there was any other. Like she wasn't. Was she sexually assaulted at all? Was there any?
So when they found her obviously burnt, and she was. You could tell that she had been cut up and disposed of. They don't know. They have no proof. All they have is the fragments of her head, which indicates 2 bullet wounds to the skull, and that's obviously a more than likely a cause of death. So the sexual part of it, the nature, no one will ever know, unfortunately, unless the killer kind of goes, yep, this is actually what happened, whether it was a rage thing, a sexual thing, a jealousy thing. No one knows. No one absolutely knows. Which brings me back to my last part, and the last part of the question is, in your professional opinion, with all the documents that you have been provided with Ryan, would he make a prime suspect?
Yeah, I would say yes. I would say yes. Just based on everything that you show me, it would seem odd for him not to be investigated in some way, or to just from what I've seen, which is very, very brief.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen his interview tapes or anything like that. So, but just the facts that he's involved with her, an ex-partner, knew her. He would have to be a suspect. It would be remiss not to think of him as a suspect. Like I said before, you always cast your net quite wide at the start,
and then you narrow it down.
Yeah, and then narrow it down, and
yeah.
So he would be probably. I don't know the full facts on it, but it seems odd that he wasn't taken more seriously or looked at a little harder.
Well, yeah, that's the burning question. Why wasn't anyone really investigated properly? But that's part of this making a murderer case. It's all over the place, and they had one motive, and that was to get Stephen Avery. So they got what they wanted, and they stopped a lawsuit. They stopped the depositions against themselves from being in trouble from the wrong lawful case that they did to him before. So yeah, I just want to thank you again so much. This has been awesome. We really appreciate this, and for, I know again with your work, and we have to protect that because of the cases you do and stuff. For you to actually come out and give us a idea of how the mind works of the criminals, it's really awesome. I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, so thank you so much, and this has been great.
All right, good luck.
Thank you.